Awesome.
My name is John Small. I am the editor-in-chief of Green Entrepreneur and greenentrepreneur.com. We are from the people who brought you Entrepreneur Magazine. We have a special cannabis vertical. That is how much we value and see the importance of cannabis right now in our company. And so we're here to talk about cannabis today in a very interesting way. This panel is called Cannabis Compatibility for the Individual Consumer, Discovering Optimal CBD, THC, and Terpene Ratios and Formulas. I'd love to introduce you to our panel. To my right is Len May, who is the co-founder and CEO of Endocana.
All right.
Next to him is Anya Kravitz. She is a cannabinoid wellness industry thought leader and the director of growth for Endocana Health. Next to Anya is Cameron Clark, Damian Lewis. Sorry, we thought maybe we'd get away with that. Cameron is the founder and CEO of Sunderstorm. And next to Cameron is Heather Capps, who is a patient and an advocate. So welcome, everyone. Welcome to the panel. Len, I'd love to start with you, since we're going to be talking a lot about your product and your company. Tell us a little bit about what Endocana is and sort of why you started the business.
Yeah, for sure. So before I do that, I just want to say that every single time that I have an opportunity to speak about cannabis, I really don't take this for granted, because I've been in the industry for 25 plus years, and I know many people who went to jail, have records for this amazing therapeutic plant. So first of all, I want to thank everybody here for showing up and listening and learning and sharing about cannabis. So give yourselves a round of applause, please, for making it out on a Thursday afternoon. I think it's great. And to answer your question is, so we're a biotech company, and we believe in making sure that people have the most optimal experience with their cannabis use. We use DNA as a guide to look at potential adverse effects and reactions to help people get the most optimal ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes that align with their genetic expression.
Great. And tell us a little bit about why you started your company.
Well, I mean, the journey is really a personal journey in the beginning. So I'm also a patient. I was diagnosed with ADD when I was a kid and put on all kinds of medication, and discovered cannabis is really the right medicine for me. And throughout most of my life, I was an advocate and president of the Cannabis Action Network. And then at some point, when I was in the dispensary space, I started treating or helping treat a lot of people with different disease states. And one of the things I learned is when we find something that works for somebody, and we send them out and say, okay, you know, maybe it's Blue Dream, that's the right cultivar for you. They take that, and people have a different experience with the same type of cannabis. And I was always curious. I always thought it was the plant genetics. So I got involved in the plant genetics side, doing genetic sequencing on the plants. But then I had an epiphany, a moment where we had a conference of physicians in Harvard Medical School, and they were talking about treating kids using CBD with epilepsy. And they were saying that there was a lot of kids that had really good results, 100 seizures a day down to 0, but there was a group of outliers that their seizures started returning. And when we looked at their genetic profile, we saw that they had markers in common, which are Dravet syndrome markers. So it gave me a thought that, cannabis is a personal experience, and genes really affect the way that you experience cannabis, or may affect that. So we kind of took a year and a half and looked at research and looked at every single genetic marker, every single gene that has a direct or indirect association with your endocannabinoid system. Once we did that, we created a kit. It's very similar to what like 23andMe kind of does, where you swab the inside of your mouth, you send it to our lab, and we'll sequence that, and we'll provide you a report that shows you different symptomatic conditions and what type of cannabinoid profile is best for you. And the main focus of this is so people avoid an adverse reaction. And what I mean by that is, how many people ever had an edible or know somebody that took an edible and maybe had an adverse reaction? Yeah, so, me included. So one of the challenges may be is, besides your liver converting THC to a different substance, it may have something to do with your genetic expression and your metabolic function. So some people, there's a gene called CYP2C9, not to get too sciencey, but that gene is associated with metabolism of THC. So if you are an ultra slow metabolizer of THC and you consume an edible, guess what? You're in for a very interesting experience. It's a slower onset, it's a longer onset, and it's a much more powerful experience. So if you know this about yourself up front, you may want to consume your ratio through sublingual or a different method of consumption, not an edible. But to complicate that, if you have a gene that's associated with potential psychosis, so not only are you consuming an edible that's making you, super high, but some people also see visuals and have a psychosis-like effect. If that's the case, there's also a gene that's associated with that. So understanding your own genetic expression and understanding what aligns with you correctly, that's the future of this cannabis therapeutic wellness treatment. That's what we want to do, is create more personalized experiences for people.
By the way, I have all of those genes. So, so tell me, what can you find out through this genetic testing? What are some of the things that you look for? I know anxiety is something that it flags. What are some of the other?
Yeah, so we have to be extremely careful because not to trigger this is not a diagnostic tool as far as the FDA is concerned. So we don't look at disease states. We look at specific symptomatic conditions that are associated possibly with a disease state. So anxiety, depression, metabolic function, cognitive function, sleep, pain, etc. There's about 8 different symptomatic conditions. So what you would get is you would get your report in your own portal that will show you the symptomatic condition, like anxiety. It'll give you your specific genetic profile, which is called your genotype, and it'll make suggestions on the optimal ratio of cannabinoids and terpenes that are right for you, and then align products that are available within your geographic area based on test results that kind of match that specific expression.
Okay. Full disclosure, I have taken the test, and we'll be talking about this in a minute, and so is Heather. But I want to get to Anna. Let's talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the cannabis marketplace now. It's the user of cannabis, especially in the legalized market, is not the typical stoner. There's been a real shift from that. And tell us kind of who the consumer is starting to be now.
So historically, the cannabis consumer has been more recreational, male, and more in the closet user. And now the consumer is more of a wellness consumer. Women and seniors have been consuming cannabis more and more. And actually, top 3 things that really people buy cannabis for and CBD are anxiety, pain, and sleep. So this should also tell you the health state of our nation currently. Just to give you some statistics on consumer growth, women are now making up the 1/3 of the cannabis consumer market, and also we have seen twice as likely for women to buy tinctures and topicals over the last 2 years. So this is who the cannabis consumer is. I like to call it the cannabis wellness consumer, not just a cannabis consumer, because everything is merging into the wellness industry. This is becoming a wellness plant, a wellness compounds that we all want to take and have more therapeutic effect.
Well, I think what we're seeing now, we're seeing CBD at CVS, Walgreens, other big chain pharmacy and drugstores, and it's considered legitimate. But it does bring up an interesting question, and maybe one of you guys can talk about, is CBD even legal? I mean, I know none of us are lawyers or government officials here, but it apparently isn't really legal, or there's a gray area around it.
I think I'll defer to Mr. Clark to answer that question.
Yeah, so this is one of the complexities in the industry. Prior to the Farm Bill, which was passed last December, January timeframe, CBD was kind of quasi-legal. It was definitely a gray area at that time. The Farm Bill essentially legalized hemp, but it didn't really specify what regulations would apply to ingestibles. So a big part of CBD are ingestibles, as we know, and the FDA has come down and said, we will regulate ingestibles, but hold on, it's going to take us some time, and now we're in a period of waiting for the FDA to actually get their act together and advise us whether, what the regulations will be. So the FDA is basically kiboshed any selling of ingestible CBD products. Which is why you won't see any of the big retailers, the big box retailers, selling anything other than probably creams and topicals and that kind of thing. There is a bill going through California right now, the Assembly, which will probably get passed in the next few months, I think, that will legalize hemp and possibly regulate parts of it for sale in California, and this will include ingestibles as well as topicals and everything else. Different states are also regulating CBD differently, so it's quite confusing out there for sure. It's going to take a couple years for all this to settle out.
Thanks. It's confusing to everyone. I want to say this actually in the beginning of the conference. I'm just curious about our audience today. How many people are in the cannabis industry? Can I have a show of hands? Okay, so a lot of you. So we know who we're talking to here. Good. And how many people are high currently?
It's the only way I do these talks.
How many people are balanced? Let's just call that. There you go.
Nice, CBD.
CBD. So Cameron, since we have you on the mic, tell us a little bit about what Sunderstorm is, the brand, and then sort of how you're working with Endocanna.
Yeah, that'd be great. So Sunderstorm is a lifestyle brand and licensed manufacturer here in California. We've been around since 2015, and a sunderstorm actually is a thunderstorm where the sun shines through. So that's kind of our ethos. We wanted to shed some bright, shining light into what has typically been kind of a dark and hidden industry, and that's been kind of our ethos. On top of that, we've also been very much of a science-based company. I have a bit of a molecular bio background myself, and so I've been very interested to apply science to cannabis. We all know that there's a lot of new research that's being done. There's a lot of potential for healing and wellness with cannabis, but we also know that there's a lot of products out there that we don't know what's in them or why we're consuming them or how much to consume. So when Len and I first met a couple years ago, we started talking about plant genetics and human genetics, and I became very excited because my limited background in molecular biology taught me that there was a lot of room for using these kinds of technologies to help us discover the power of cannabis. So what I loved about what Len was doing is essentially merging what I call marrying human genetics with plant genetics to try to figure out what are the right products for each of us. I like to tell this story, and I'll steal a little bit of Len's thunder here. Cannabis is personal, and I love that, and that's one of Len's mantras. So when I was in college, and we'd sit around and I'd take 2 hits off of a joint, I would go sit in the corner and stare at the wall. Well, all my friends would run around and socialize and be active, and I could never figure out what that was about. And what I realized after a while recently is that we're all very different, and cannabis interacts with our bodies completely differently, and it's compounded by the fact that there's a variety of compounds and terpenes and cannabinoids that create an entourage effect that make it even more complex. So Len and I talked a lot about how could we do the research? How could we develop technologies where we could learn about how each individual's genome related to their cannabis consumption, and then develop products that were specifically designed for you and your genetics. And frankly, I think it's the future of cannabis, and all of us are very excited about it.
So when you say they're specifically designed, do you mean that the dosing is what is being recommended by Endocanna, and the different terpene profile?
Yeah, so it's even more complex than that, right?
Okay.
So there's a variety of cannabinoids, and look, we're in the early days here, right? I mean, we're starting on a path using true science, and there is a bit of science out there and research that's being done, and we're culling from that population of scientific literature. But there'll be more and more published, every week, and we're going to learn a lot more about this. But the concept is that cannabinoids themselves, in different ratios, impact our bodies in different ways, right? The terpenes also do that. But one of the more exciting things that Len is working on, about the metabolomics, you want to talk about that at all, or?
I'm gonna give an example, if you guys don't mind. So I was recently going over somebody's report, and it's sort of like putting tea leaves together. We don't know each other, so I'm kind of reviewing what the genetic profile tells me about a person. Just because you have a genetic predisposition, it doesn't mean it's going to express itself, or may not express itself every single time. So in going through this experience, there's a couple of genes that really stood out to me. The one gene is called FAH, F-A-H, and what that does, that breaks down anandamide, which is your bliss hormone. Anand in Sanskrit means bliss, and that helps to regulate a lot of different emotions within your amygdala, specifically stress. So one of the things I was always curious about, doctors say every disease is caused by stress. And I'm like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, but how? How does that work? So I'm looking through and I'm seeing that there's a marker that shows that this individual actually has a lower basal level of anandamide. So people that have more FAH produce less anandamide and actually deal with stressors differently. So if it's kind of like a fight or flight being triggered on an ongoing basis and having a very difficult time to manage that fight or flight, so the byproduct of that is not only you're going through stress, but also cortisol is released into your bloodstream. And cortisol is released in your bloodstream along with your arteries expanding, heart rate, and all that stuff. And if it goes on for a prolonged period of time, you have an elevated pH level, so you become more acidic. Your immune system begins to attack that as an overactive immune response, and it does that through inflammation. So people walk around inflamed and have these pain, this discomfort that comes up. And then if you don't address that over a long period of time, it also starts to affect your gut health. So that's when IBS and Crohn's and all these other issues come up. So in doing this profile, I'm seeing a couple things. Number one, high FAH level. So it's called a homozygous allele combination FAH. The second one was a very, very slow metabolizer, and I'm going to answer that as an example of that. Slow metabolizer. So same thing with an edible. You consume an edible, and then there's another gene called AKT1, which is prone to people having psychosis. So this person, I'm going through the report saying, how do you do with edibles? And she was like, well, what happens to me when I consume the same amount of THC as my friends, I get super high, and sometimes I even start to hallucinate. I have these psychotic, and they all make fun of me. I'm saying, well, you have the perfect combination of, FAH, AKT1, and a slow metabolizer. So, well, how do we mitigate that? What can I do? I said, well, your dose is not the same as your friend's dose. Not only the formulation, but it's also dosing. So think about it this way. If you're an ultra-fast metabolizer, and you have a spray, a sublingual spray. So maybe for you, 4 sprays in your tongue is the right dose for you because you're an ultra-fast metabolizer. If you're an average metabolizer, maybe it's only 2. And if you're an ultra-slow metabolizer, 1 may be enough. So understanding not only the profile that's connected to you genetically, but also how to use that to dose correctly, that's sort of the future of what we're moving into. And that's, some of the things we're working on with Cameron and the Thunderstorm.
So just to clarify, so if I take my test and I get my results back, is there somebody that can walk me, because you just did a very in detail, explanation of what is happening, and some people are just like, just tell me what to take, Is there somebody that kind of walks you through, recommendations for you?
Well, the idea is for it to be intuitive enough where you can go through that yourself and understand which product to take. So at the end of the test, at the end of the report, there will be products that are associated with your suggestion. We do have relationships with groups of physicians, healthcare practitioners, through a telemed service. So if that's something that interests you a little bit more, you can click on and make an appointment through a telemed service with that. And then also we're coming out with version 2 in the next 30 to 45 days, and that'll hone in a little bit more on disease states and other things that are more associated with a healthcare practitioner. So the difference is a physician or a healthcare practitioner will have to recommend that test to comply with the FDA. But yes, so to answer your question, we have resources available to go over your report, and we also are making it much more intuitive for not having the need to do that unless you're interested.
But I would also say that we're going to be capturing a lot of data and information as we move forward, right? And we'll use this information and data to be able to improve recommendations as in the coming years.
We should say that that data is anonymous, right?
Yes, so just to add in really, I'm so glad you brought that up. So not only is the information anonymized and secure, but we have a feedback loop mechanism. So we built an API. There's a lot of different apps there to provide feedback. Hey, how are you doing with this? So we're taking that information in. Just because we give you a suggestion, how's it working on a cellular level? How does it work for you? So by you communicating that feedback loop, we use artificial intelligence to learn from that experience and start making even better recommendations. So not only are we gathering all the science that's going on from around the world, your reports are always being updated on an ongoing basis. We're also learning from the individual's experiences and providing better informative suggestions.
All right, Heather, I haven't forgotten about you down there. So Heather has done the test, or done one of the tests. Tell us a little bit about your experience with it, why you did it, and what you found out.
Well, first of all, I'm not a stoner, so I don't partake too much of the THC. I'm more at the CBD side for inflammation, and I have chronic inflammation due to endometriosis and joint pain because I'm 6 feet tall, and you know, when you're taller, you have more to carry around. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is I was curious about, am I taking the right amount? Am I taking a quality product, which I know that I am because it's lab tested. And I was at first nervous about the test results because there were some markers on there that I was at risk for: alcoholism, some other psychosis when you take too much, you know, above a certain amount of the THC level, which lets me know that's why I can't do the THC. That's why I have not good experiences when I do that. So it was a good guide, but also Len was very good at explaining the test to me. And it set me at ease to not be afraid that just because you have a marker for alcoholism doesn't mean it's going to manifest or trigger in your lifetime. It just means you got to watch it.
So did you go out on a little shopping expedition after you got your results and say, like, okay, I'm looking for specifically for, like, you know, a product that has this kind of ratio of THC, CBD, or whatever? Did you go out on a little shopping expedition?
Well, I have been to some dispensaries, but I was already on CBD at the time of the test, and the test, all the test did for me was to seal the deal and say, you are on the right amount, you are on a good product that's right for you. So I was lucky in that fact.
Yeah.
And then I knew to stay away from, you know, the crazy 10 milligrams or higher edibles, or, you know, or flowers and things. So
Right. So we have we have a bunch of entrepreneurs on the panel, but I'm just curious, since there's a lot of people in the business here, what are some of the biggest challenges you see in starting a business in the cannabis space, and how have you overcome some of them, or how are you trying to overcome some of them?
I mean, our challenge is so many, but from a standpoint of stigma. So it's interesting because we don't touch the plant. We have nothing really to do with cannabis directly, and we had our bank account shut down several times. We've had our credit cards shut down several times, and we can't understand why, and the reason why is because there's crawlers and bots that go through your website, and if you have the word cannabis, you're automatically associated with the cannabis business and all that. So that kind of was a struggle to overcome, and a major obstacle that we never even thought would be an obstacle, since we're not a dispensary or a cannabis shop or a cultivator. Also, it's when you're new and you're doing something new and innovative, the adoption becomes a little bit, it takes a lot of education. So for us to go out and have events like this and have ambassadors to educate people and to understand that why somebody has a personal experience, that's something of a challenge to overcome as well.
And to add to Len, it's not just companies like ours, but also CBD companies all across the board have major challenges in processing, and a lot of brands really can't process and get the product to their customers. So it creates a really larger layer of how to do business in the CBD space as well.
And there's also a bit of a snake oil problem. Let's
Yes.
face it. There's a lot of CBD out there that is not the real thing. It doesn't even actually have CBD.
CBD, or it's CBD
Adjacent.
seed, or it's just seed oil, which a lot of products out there in the consumer market have that. So the consumer is overpaying for CBD products. The lack of education in the CBD consumer market is pretty great. A lot of consumers are not educated. The brands do not really educate the consumers, neither do the large box retailers as well. So that's why it's so exciting. What we're doing at Endo is we're actually creating a GPS system, a tool, a navigational tool that will help consumers navigate through the CBD and the cannabis industries and be helpful to buying products that are personalized for them. So.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that as well. So I, just 2 hours ago, I was at a discussion about this particular topic, and it's really interesting when you know that California and other states have regulated systems for THC and other cannabinoids, but CBD is not really regulated. And the bill that's going through the California Assembly right now was originally written just to legalize hemp CBD so that it could be sold in dispensaries, as well as ingestibles being able to be sold outside of dispensaries. It's kind of interesting that hemp is not currently allowed to be sold inside dispensaries. They're trying to clean that up, but what they forgot is to actually ensure that the CBD is properly tested so the consumer knows what's in it. My estimate is, and this is just what my gut telling me, I've told other people this, that as much as 50% of the CBD on the market is either mislabeled, has no CBD in there whatsoever, is full of pesticides that are toxic, and it behooves us to have some sort of regulated system that forces the testing of CBD products. And the good news is that in the dispensaries they have cannabis-derived CBD products that have a little bit of THC in them, and they are all tested. So you can decide where you'd like to buy your CBD. In California, I think they're going to add a rider to the bill that will convince them that will be include testing of CBD products that will be sold throughout California. I think it's an important thing. It's odd to test your THC but not test your CBD.
Yeah. And also, we should add that the FDA, I think it's next week, is meeting with Congress and different CBD makers, right, to discuss regulations. Of course, that'll probably take about 5 years. So we'll stick around. We'll hopefully the states will do it first.
Everybody has 5 minutes. We're submitting a talk to the
Are you?
FDA. Yes.
Oh, great. Okay. Heather, as a consumer, what do you find the most challenging, in getting CBD products? How do you figure out whether something is legit or not? I think you mentioned that you were just recently in Kansas and you bought some CBD products and they just didn't work, right?
No, there was no comparison. The product I buy here in California to the product that I got in Kansas. And it also didn't taste very good. The flavorings they used. And this is a reputable company in Kansas that has over 42 stores, so I thought I could trust it. I spent my money on it, and it did not even compare. Actually, it didn't do anything to me except for leave a bad taste in my mouth. Right. The product I get here is lab tested, and I know that it's going to work because it's consistent. And we also have put my boyfriend's mom on it for the last year, along with the THC combo, a sublingual, and it basically has taken her from the brink of death to living her life again. And she's got Alzheimer's and dementia. She wasn't eating. She was difficult to deal with, combative. And this product on a regular basis has basically given her life back and given her back to us. So that's another reason I'm a believer in this product.
There's nothing like a real story. Yeah. Your genes can tell you a lot, but yeah, once you really see it.
Yeah, and it's important that her dose is consistent as well, because if she gets too little, then it's going to be a problem. You know, if she gets the same amount, it's
so
good.
You bring up this issue of consistency, and this is an issue I'd love you to talk about this, Cameron. Where how do you make sure in your products that people are getting that consistent experience each time? And I know that's a big challenge for manufacturers. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, and this is actually one of the reasons that I personally got into this industry, because I knew that there were a lot of products on the shelf that weren't tested. You didn't know what was in them. We have a bit of a science background. We wanted to come in this industry and create products that whether you consumed, open a bag of gummies today and consume the product, or you bought another one 6 months from now, you'd have exactly the same experience. Generally the same experience. And so we test all of our products, all of the oils, right out of the gate. We test everything 4 times, essentially. Okay. One of the challenges for us has been testing amongst different labs. When the labs were first kind of getting their facilities up and running, there was some challenges with having standardization across the labs. We finally found the one lab that we feel like does a really great job, and there's a lot of consistency. That's important, so we test everything with them, and it's been great for us. So, in fact, we just won an award for the most well-formulated edible in the industry. So I was by the lab, so I was pretty excited about that.
They're good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the problem. Everyone's always asking him for samples. The name of the lab?
Yeah, that was Cannabis here in LA, actually. Yeah.
I want to open up the floor to questions, since we have an audience here, and I don't know exactly what you guys would like to know, so I'd love to open it up. If anybody has a question, yes. Do we have microphones for our audience members? Should I go down there? Well,
You can just get up
you
and
can just
talk.
get up
Yeah,
and talk to
yeah.
us. Join the panel. Hi.
How many years have you been?
So was the question, how many years have we compiled the information and data that we're using to make the suggestions? So,
Also podbotics. She brought
I'm sorry?
up podbotics. Did you say what's the difference between podbotics?
no, Podbotics, remember I was talking about different apps that give you the feedback experience. So Podbot is one of the apps that we would have an API into to get that experience back. So the way that we work is we looked at all the science that's been published, anything that's been peer reviewed. We look at the science. We have a scientific team that reviews that information and makes a determination whether that clinical trial, assay, or published study that's been peer reviewed would be sufficient to add into our suggestion. So it's using artificial intelligence as well, with some criteria that we put in, whether this information is sufficient to include in our research. So anything that's been published anywhere in the world or a university study goes into our AI. Our science team then looks at it after it goes through the system and makes a determination whether it's sufficient to include. Going forward, since it's using AI, we constantly look through other research that's done, because research is being published every single day, and then we make a determination. So there are scientific studies that look at 20 people from the age 35 to 40 that had this. We would throw that study out because that's not a big enough control group to be able to include. And I mean, the more studies, the better. We're encouraging that, and then we give different weight to human studies versus like in vitro or test tube studies or animal studies. Yeah. So the kit is a buccal saliva swab. It's like a big Q-tip. You swab the inside of your mouth. You put it back in the box, and then you ship it over to our lab. One thing that I didn't mention is there's somewhere around 40 million people or so that took some sort of DNA test, whether it's a 23andMe, an Ancestry, or any other test. So if you have taken that, you don't have to swab. You can upload your raw data that belongs to you from those companies, and we'll give you a report within 30 seconds. I'm prefacing that we're only as good as the version of the report that they did. So like the earlier versions of 23andMe had a lot more coverage than the latter versions. So, but it's an entry, and I'll give you some information, and you can upgrade to another one. So the full kit is $199, and the raw data test is $49.95.
And where can you get the kits?
endocanahealth.com. And Erewhon stores and dispensaries.
Of course, Erewhon.
And we're sold in Erewhon and other retailers as well.
Right.
Well, Len, I uploaded my DNA report from another company to your site, and wasn't it less? Was it less?
It was
Discount?
It was what?
Do you get a discount
Yeah,
when you have existing DNA?
So if
Yeah.
you've had your test done by another company, yeah.
$49.95.
Yeah, so it's $49.95. That's what I did. I just took my
And how easy was
Ancestry.com
it?
and I put it in. Took about 3 seconds, and I'm not techie at all, and it came up rather quickly.
So you can find out how much of Neanderthal you are, and at the same time also if how much CBD and THC you should. Exactly. Yes, please.
Michael Howard, LA Cannabis News. I question, well, first of all, I had a volunteer, offer was, to be a guinea pig for any kind of testing, a combination of THC or CBD. I've had far more than whatever you could throw at me, and then, had small microdoses. Anyway, the question is, though, when you're creating a profile for, sort of individualized situation, which is amazing, how then would you, Sunstrong, be able to create, products specifically for particular people? Like how many different sort of SKUs are you going to have?
Genetically aligned.
1090, 20, to 5, what kind of different ratios are you planning to launch there?
Yeah, that's a good question. For everybody that couldn't hear the question, when we're creating genetically aligned products, how many different types of products will we create? How many different SKUs, and essentially how will they work with your particular genome? So, like I said earlier, we're still in the initial stages. We actually haven't fully launched our products yet. They've been in testing for about 6 months. I was the first test candidate, which was fun. Because I'm a lightweight, right? So I'm very hypersensitive to THC. So it was good for me to test these products. But we're going to start with 6 or 7 SKUs. Initially, they're going to be kind of on a 1-to-1 ratio between CBD and THC. There's other compounds in there. There's a variety of terpenes and other compounds that we're blending in that will modify the effects. But the next round, probably a few months later, will be other specific ratios, and I was kind of thinking about it on the car driving here. I could see where this could scale up to almost 100 different products, right? Depending on ratios and different types of compounds. So we'll see how it all develops. We'll see what the level of interest is. In our case, we're going to cherry pick certain dispensaries throughout the state that are interested in having these types of science-based products, and they have wellness coaches or doctors on site to be able to discuss this with their patients, and then we'll start with those kind of test cases and roll it out and see how in the next probably 45 days and see how it goes. So you can follow us actually on sunderstorm.com, and you can sign up, and we can let you know where we're gonna. You'll go to our website. We'll let you know where we'll be selling the products.
Yes.
I have a CBD product, CBD for where just around 4 years. And over that 4-year period, I was getting it done. I had tried probably raw materials. And I'm down to 2 farms that feel comfortable with. But both, one is out of Colorado, one's out of Oregon. So if the new California law passed with the testing, things of that nature, will it become where you won't be able to transfer interstate lines?
So the answer to that, I think, is gray. I think you can transport, as far as I can tell, you can transport CBD products across state lines.
They have a testing law, will you be able to bring the raw products, the biomass, the raw products into California to make your product?
That's a good question about whether or not you can actually bring raw hemp product, raw materials, or whether it has to be grown in California. I think you will be able to bring them in, but I think they're going to have to be tested. So before they get into the supply chain.
Yeah, I think it's going to be hemp-derived CBD. They're going to say it's covered under the Farm Bill, and anything that's cannabis-derived, above 0.03, is going to have to be cultivated in the state. I don't think they're going to shut down Oregon's and Kentucky's business because that's their entire business. Not enough people to consume all that product within those states.
But there is some complexity to that answer, though, for sure. Because
I'm not a
different
lawyer, by
states-
the way. I'm just saying this is just an opinion.
Yeah, no, I've heard a story recently about a truck driver that got arrested in Idaho. So I don't know the veracity of that story. So, but yeah, it's challenging.
Question.
No, I was just going to advise to actually talk to an attorney because that case, they took the vehicle away with the CBD and the hemp. And then also, I think they're prosecuting him for 11 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
You need to be careful and then you need to make sure that you ask anything that has to do with law to an attorney or somebody that can be a little bit more helpful. Because we're in the industry that, sometimes we get kind of like,
Yeah,
don't do it because even carrying a CBD, a little jar of it from California to another state, you can get in trouble.
Definitely different states are developing their own regulations on CBD. So it's going to take some time for this all to hash out, for sure.
Hash out. See? Thank you. Thank you. We'll be here all week.
Hey, can I just add, because I think you asked a really good question. I want to make the difference between personalized and individualized. So personalized is based on your genetic predispositions. So we have about 7 different formulations that we kind of align with different buckets based on genetic traits. It's not an individualized because each individual have a different experience. Genetics are just one single guide. So you have your DNA as a guide, you have your nutrition, what you put into your body, you have your mental state that can trigger that genetic expression. So your individual experience may be different. So this is a guide, 1 of 7, and then individually you're going to have to modify that. And as we get more feedback going based on what you consumed and other tests, testing your anandamide levels, testing your 2-AG, testing your C-reactive proteins in your blood, once we get to that and actually conduct real clinical studies, we'll be able to hone in a lot more on an individualized level.
And just to add to that really quickly is our report that we provide to our customers, it's dynamic. So as science evolves, the report evolves, so the information that you will be getting is evolving every time that new science and information comes
How
out.
much of your own research are you doing? I know that you are compiling a lot of research. Are you doing your own research as well?
Yeah, so we have 6 clinical trials right now with a partner in Australia called Word Medication Management. So we're doing 6 trials there. The first one is on late-stage dementia patients, and all the patients are going to be swabbed, and then they're going to be given the same exact formulation, and we're going to see if a genotype of their genetic expression is going to change the way that that dementia affects them using the same exact formulation. The second one is on PTSD, and then we're doing a study here in the US. It's more an observational study, but it's also using EEG phenotypes. And what I mean by that is it's on ADHD and then pain. So you're looking at genetics, and you're also looking at phenotypes based on EEG, so that how the formulation you consume, how that's actually affecting you and your EEG channels and their phenotypes. So that's the research we're doing right now, and we'd love to participate in as much research as possible.
Other questions? Anybody? Have we covered everything?
Yeah.
I think we have. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.